Officer Derek Sullivan's boots crunched on the pristine sidewalk of Brookhaven's whitest enclave. He spotted the black man in an expensive suit and his face twisted with disgust. "What the fuck you think you're doing here, boy?" Sullivan's voice cut through the morning silence like a whip. The man turned. "Officer, Shut your mouth!" Sullivan grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it to examine his watch. "Is this Rolex stolen? Are you breaking into these houses?" He shoved the man backward. "Turn around, hands behind your back. Now!" "Officer, please!" Sullivan slammed him against a luxury car, the metallic thud echoing down the street. "I said turn around, you piece of shit! You don't belong here!" The man's expensive suit wrinkled against the hood. His calm voice barely contained rage. "I live in this house." Sullivan laughed cruelly. "Sure you do, and I'm Barack fucking Obama." Have you ever witnessed such raw, humiliating hatred directed at someone simply for existing? 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes until the call. Terrence Washington felt the cold metal of his BMW's hood against his chest. 23 years of federal service, and he was being treated like a common criminal on his own property. ID. Now. Sullivan's breath reeked of stale coffee and contempt. Terrence slowly reached for his wallet, movements deliberate. Any sudden gesture could escalate this beyond repair. His fingers found the leather billfold, Italian crafted, a gift from his wife Keisha after his last promotion. Sullivan snatched it, flipping through contents like he was searching for contraband. "Terrence Washington," he read mockingly. "What kind of made-up name is that?" "It's my name, officer." "Bullshit." Sullivan held up the Federal Credit Union Platinum card, studying it with suspicion. "Where'd you steal this from? This is government-issued." Across the street, Mrs. Carter's live stream was gaining traction. Notification sounds pinged from her phone as the viewer count climbed. She whispered into the camera, "This is absolutely disgusting. He lives here. I've seen him every morning for 3 years." The comments section exploded. "Call the FBI. This is 2025, not 1955. Sue them for everything." But darker voices emerged from anonymous accounts. "He looks suspicious to me. Probably casing the neighborhood. These people don't belong here." Sullivan's radio crackled. "Unit 47 requesting backup on Maple Drive." "Copy that, 47. Unit 23 en route." Terrence's phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Director Jensen, FBI." He declined the call, checking his Omega Seamaster. The Federal Credit Union card wasn't the only thing Sullivan had missed. The small eagle insignia on his lapel, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, caught the morning sunlight. "You got a permit for this neighborhood, boy?" Sullivan shoved the wallet back at him. "Rich folks around here pay good money to keep your kind out." "Officer Sullivan." Terrence read the nameplate with deliberate clarity. "I'm going to ask you to step back." "You'll ask me?" Sullivan's hand moved to his taser. "You're giving me orders now?" The sound of another patrol car approaching made Terrence's jaw tighten. This was escalating exactly as his civil rights training had predicted it would. Multiple officers, residential setting, no immediate witnesses except social media. Officer Janet Mills stepped out of the second cruiser, immediately sizing up the scene. Sullivan waved her over with obvious relief. "Got a suspicious individual here, Mills. Claims he lives in the Morrison house." Mills looked at the imposing colonial behind them, easily worth $2 million, then back at Terrence. Her expression said everything. "Do you have any documentation proving residence?" Mills asked, her tone more professional but equally skeptical. Terrence reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Both officers tensed, hands moving toward weapons. He produced a set of keys, the BMW's distinctive fob prominent among them. "House keys, car keys, mailbox key." Sullivan grabbed them, examining each one. "Could have made copies. Could have stolen the car." Mrs. Carter's voice carried across the street. "Officers! He's lived here for 3 years. His name is on the mailbox." Ma'am, please step back from the situation, Mills called out. We're conducting an investigation. Investigation into what? Mrs. Carter shot back, still filming. A man standing in his own driveway? 9:52 a.m., 8 minutes remaining. Terrence's phone buzzed again. Same caller, same decline. But this time, he allowed himself the faintest smile. Sullivan was too focused on the keys to notice. "What's funny, boy?" Sullivan's voice was getting louder, more aggressive. "You think this is some kind of joke?" "No, officer. I think this is exactly what I expected." The comment hit Sullivan wrong. Expected? Are you saying you planned this? More neighbors were emerging. The Hendersons from next door, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson walked her poodle, stopping to stare. The Wilson twins on their morning jog, slowing to watch. Some looked concerned. Others looked satisfied, like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Karen Mitchell appeared from her corner house, her HOA coordinator badge prominent on her jogging outfit. She'd been the one person who'd never welcomed Terrence to the neighborhood. "Officers," Karen approached with obvious authority. "We've had several break-ins lately, better safe than sorry." Mills nodded appreciatively. "See? The community is concerned about security." "I've lived here since 2022, Terrence said quietly. "I've never met with any HOA coordinator." "Because you're not supposed to be here," Karen replied coldly. "This neighborhood has standards." The live stream was viral now. 2,847 viewers and climbing. Local news outlets were picking up the feed. Dana Williams from Channel 7 was already en route. Mrs. Carter had sent her the link directly. Hashtags began trending. #Brookhaven. Racial profiling, #Justice for Terrence, /Blacktails, stories. But Terrence wasn't watching social media. He was watching his Omega, counting down. The small encrypted message indicator blinked once, twice. His federal contact was getting impatient. "You know what?" Sullivan stepped closer, invading personal space. "I think we need to take a ride downtown. Let the detectives sort this out." "On what charge?" "Trespassing, public disturbance, failure to comply with lawful orders." Terrence looked directly into Sullivan's eyes. "Officer, I strongly recommend you wait." "Wait for what, smart guy?" "You'll see." 9:56 a.m., 4 minutes remaining. The handcuffs clicked into place. The steel handcuffs bit into Terrence's wrists as Sullivan forced him against the patrol car. The expensive fabric of his suit jacket scraped against rough metal, but his expression remained unnervingly calm. "You have the right to remain silent," Sullivan began, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Officer Sullivan." Terrence's voice cut through the Miranda rights. "Badge number 4471. I want you to remember that number." Sullivan paused mid-sentence. "What did you say?" "Your badge number. 4471. I want you to remember it." Something in Terrence's tone made Sullivan's confidence waver for just a moment. Then anger flared. "You're threatening me, boy?" "I'm simply asking you to remember your badge number." 9:58 a.m., 2 minutes remaining. The third patrol car arrived with Sergeant Rodriguez behind the wheel. His 15 years of experience showed in the way he immediately assessed the scene. Handcuffed black man, 2 officers, growing crowd, phones recording everywhere. "What have we got?" Rodriguez approached with cautious authority. "Trespassing suspect," Mills reported. "Claims he lives in the Morrison house." Rodriguez looked at the imposing colonial, then at Terrence's obviously expensive attire. Something didn't add up, but protocol was protocol. "Any ID?" Sullivan held up the wallet. "Says Terrence Washington. Probably fake." "The Federal Credit Union card, too?" Rodriguez examined it more closely than Sullivan had. "These are hard to counterfeit." "Probably stolen," Karen Mitchell interjected, stepping closer to the officers. "I'm the HOA coordinator. I know everyone who belongs here." Mrs. Carter's live stream had exploded. The viewer count hit 8,000 and was climbing exponentially. Her comment section was a war zone. "This is disgusting. Where are the civil rights lawyers? Someone call the FBI. Racist cops need to be fired." But anonymous accounts pushed back. "Good police work. Keep the neighborhood safe. He doesn't belong there." Local news vans were already dispatched. Dana Williams from Channel 7 was 5 minutes out. 2 other stations had picked up the feed. Rodriguez studied Terrence more carefully. The man's composure was unusual. Not the nervous energy of someone caught in wrongdoing. Not the anger of someone falsely accused. Something else entirely. "Mr. Washington, can you provide proof of residence?" "The keys your officer confiscated open my front door, my car, and my mailbox," Terrence replied evenly. "Mrs. Carter across the street can verify I've lived here for 3 years. "Keys can be copied," Sullivan insisted. "Cars can be stolen." Rodriguez wasn't convinced, but the crowd was growing larger and more restless. The Hendersons were openly filming now. Mrs. Patterson had called her husband. The Wilson twins had stopped jogging entirely. "Look," Rodriguez said, trying to de-escalate. "Let's just verify the residence and—" "No." Sullivan stepped forward aggressively. "I'm not playing games with this. He's trespassing. He's been uncooperative, and now he's making threats." "What threats?" Rodriguez asked. "Told me to remember my badge number. That's intimidation." Terrence's phone rang again, the 3rd time. "Director Jensen, FBI," glowed on the screen for everyone to see. Sullivan grabbed the phone. "Drug dealer calling? Your parole officer, maybe?" He answered mockingly. "Hello, this is Officer Sullivan. Your boy Terrence is under arrest." The voice on the other end was sharp, authoritative. "Excuse me? I said your buddy's under arrest. You want to post bail? Call the station." "Officer, this is FBI Director Jensen. I need to speak with Agent Washington immediately." Sullivan's grin faltered. "FBI? Yeah, right. And I'm the president." Rodriguez stepped closer, alarm bells going off. "Sullivan, hang up the phone." But Sullivan was committed now. "Listen here, whoever you are, this is a police matter. Your friend is going downtown. Agent Washington is a federal officer. I'm ordering you to release him immediately." "Agent?" Sullivan laughed harshly. "This guy? He's a criminal." The line went dead. 9:59 a.m., 1 minute remaining. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez stared at Sullivan, whose face had gone pale. Mills looked between her partners, suddenly uncertain. "What if that was real?" Mills whispered. "It wasn't," Sullivan insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's some kind of setup." Mrs. Carter's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers. The comments were flying so fast they were unreadable. 3 news vans were now visible in the distance. Terrence remained perfectly still against the patrol car, but his eyes found his watch. The small display showed an encrypted message. "Federal response authorized." "Officers," Terrence spoke quietly, but his voice carried an unmistakable authority. "I'm going to give you one more opportunity to de-escalate this situation." "Shut up!" Sullivan snapped, but the confidence was gone. Karen Mitchell stepped forward. "Officers, I don't care who he thinks he is. This is a gated community. We have rules." "Actually," Mrs. Carter called out from across the street, her phone still recording, "this isn't a gated community, Karen, and he pays more property taxes than you do." The crowd murmured. More neighbors had emerged, some supportive, others skeptical, all recording. Rodriguez was sweating now. 15 years of experience told him this was going sideways fast. The man's composure, the federal credit card, the phone call, too many red flags. "Sullivan, maybe we should—" "No." Sullivan's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not backing down to some—" He caught himself, but the word hung in the air anyway. Terrence turned his head slowly, looking directly at Sullivan. "Some what, officer?" The crowd went dead silent. Even the live stream comments paused. "You know what you were going to say," Terrence continued, his voice deadly calm. "Say it." Sullivan's jaw worked, but no words came. 10 o'clock a.m. The call. Terrence's phone rang for the fourth time. This time he looked directly at Sullivan. "I think you should answer that." Rodriguez reached for the phone, but Sullivan snatched it away. "No, I'm handling this," he answered with forced bravado. "Sullivan here." "Officer Sullivan, this is FBI Director Jensen. I'm ordering you to release Agent Washington immediately." "I don't care who you think you are. Badge number 4471. Officer Derek Sullivan, Brookhaven Police Department. 12 years of service. 17 complaints filed against you in the past 2 years, 89% involving people of color." Sullivan's face went white. Rodriguez stepped closer, trying to hear. "You have exactly 60 seconds to remove those handcuffs, or I'm dispatching federal agents to your location." The line went dead again. Sullivan stared at the phone, his hand trembling slightly. "Federal agents?" Mills whispered. Rodriguez was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need to speak with Chief Morrison immediately." But it was too late. In the distance, black SUVs were already visible, moving fast toward Maple Drive. Terrence finally smiled. The black SUVs moved through Brookhaven like sharks cutting through still water. 3 vehicles, tinted windows, federal plates. They stopped in perfect formation at the end of Maple Drive. Sullivan stared at them, his mouth dry. Those can't be federal agents," Rodriguez finished grimly. His radio crackled with dispatcher confusion. Chief Morrison was en route, but these SUVs had arrived first. Terrence remained motionless against the patrol car, handcuffs still tight around his wrists, but his demeanor had shifted. The quiet composure was now something else, the stillness of a predator who knows the trap is about to spring. "Officer Sullivan," Terrence spoke without turning around, "I'd like you to look at my lapel pin again." Sullivan's eyes dropped to the small eagle insignia he'd ignored earlier. The morning light caught the detailed metalwork, not costume jewelry, but government-issued sterling silver. "What is that?" "FBI service pin. 23 years. The words hit like a physical blow. Mills stepped backward instinctively. Rodriguez closed his eyes and muttered a prayer. From the lead SUV, a tall black woman emerged. FBI Director Sarah Jensen moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command. Her tailored suit was immaculate, her expression granite. Mrs. Carter's live stream exploded. 22,000 viewers and climbing. The comment section was pure chaos. "Oh my God, he's really FBI. Those cops are so screwed. Lawsuit incoming. Blacktail stories need to cover this." Behind Jensen came 6 more agents, a coordinated unit in dark suits and earpieces. They moved like they'd done this before. Karen Mitchell was backing away slowly, her HOA badge suddenly feeling very small and very meaningless. "Agent Washington," Jensen's voice carried across the street with crisp authority. "Status report." Terrence finally turned, the handcuffs forcing an awkward movement. "Currently detained by Officer Sullivan, badge number 4471 on suspicion of trespassing." "Trespassing on your own property?" "Apparently." Jensen's gaze swept over Sullivan, Mills, and Rodriguez like a blade. "Officer Sullivan, I believe we spoke on the phone." Sullivan's voice came out as a croak. "You're really FBI?" "Director Jensen, Federal Bureau of Investigation." She produced her credentials with practiced efficiency. "Agent Washington is my assistant director for the Civil Rights Division." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Assistant director? Civil Rights Division? Rodriguez was frantically trying to process the magnitude of the mistake. "Ma'am, we were responding to a call about suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity?" Jensen's voice could have cut steel. A federal agent standing in his own driveway? Mills found her voice. We didn't know he was... You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a black man in an expensive neighborhood and made assumptions. More neighbors had gathered. The Hendersons looked mortified. Mrs. Patterson was openly apologizing to no one in particular. The Wilson twins were live streaming on their own phones now, but Jensen wasn't interested in the crowd. Her focus was laser-sharp on Sullivan. Officer Sullivan, how many complaints have been filed against you in the past 24 months? I don't know the exact... 17 complaints. 89% involving people of color. Would you like me to read them aloud? Sullivan's face had gone gray. That's not relevant to... Officer Derek Sullivan, badge 4471, April 2023, excessive force complaint dismissed. June 2023, racial profiling allegation, sustained. August 2023, inappropriate language, verbal warning. September 2023, stop! Rodriguez stepped forward. Director Jensen, I apologize for this situation. We'll release Agent Washington immediately. But Jensen held up a hand. I'm not finished. October 2023, unlawful detention, settled out of court. November 2023. Please, Sullivan whispered. December 2023, harassment complaint, dismissed on technicality. January 2024. Why are you doing this? Sullivan's voice cracked. Jensen stepped closer. Because Agent Washington has been investigating systematic bias in law enforcement for the past 18 months. This interaction is being documented as part of a federal civil rights case study. The silence was deafening. Mrs. Carter's phone nearly slipped from her hands. She was recording a federal investigation. Case study? Mills managed. Operation Mirror, Jensen continued. Agent Washington has been documenting bias patterns across 47 police departments nationwide. Brookhaven PD was selected based on complaint ratios and demographic data. Terrence spoke quietly. I moved to this neighborhood specifically to test response patterns. Expensive area, predominantly white, history of suspicious person calls. Sullivan stared at him in horror. You set this up? I bought a house and stood in my own driveway, Terrence replied calmly. Everything else was your choice. Rodriguez was trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Agent Washington, we apologize for any... Sergeant Rodriguez, Jensen interrupted. Your department receives $2.3 million in federal funding annually. Civil rights violations can trigger federal oversight and budget review. The financial implications hit Rodriguez like a freight train. Federal funding paid for equipment, training, half their annual budget. Jensen gestured to one of her agents, who approached with bolt cutters. The handcuffs fell away from Terrence's wrists with a metallic click. He rubbed the circulation back into his hands, straightening his suit jacket. For the first time, he looked like what he was, a federal agent with 23 years of experience and the full weight of the U.S. government behind him. Officer Sullivan, Terrence's voice carried new authority. Do you remember what I told you about remembering your badge number? Sullivan nodded mutely. This incident is now a federal record. Badge 4471, Officer Derek Sullivan. Unlawful detention of a federal agent, civil rights violation, abuse of authority. The live stream had reached 45,000 viewers. News helicopters were visible in the distance. This wasn't just a neighborhood incident anymore. It was national news. Dana Williams from Channel 7 arrived with her crew, but she was too late for the main event. She began setting up for aftermath interviews. Karen Mitchell tried to slip away unnoticed, but Jensen's voice stopped her. Ms. Mitchell, HOA coordinator, you stated that Agent Washington didn't belong in this neighborhood. Karen froze. I was mistaken. You were discriminatory. This interaction is also part of the federal record. More agents were arriving. A mobile command unit pulled up. This was becoming a full federal response. Rodriguez keyed his radio. "All units stand down. Federal operation in progress." But Chief Morrison was already pulling up in his unmarked vehicle, and his face was the color of old concrete. Jensen turned to address the growing crowd and cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is systematic bias in action. Officer Sullivan made assumptions based solely on race and perceived social status." She gestured toward Terrence. "Agent Washington purchased this home in 2022. He pays $47,000 annually in property taxes. He has lived here without incident for 3 years." The crowd murmured. $47,000 in property taxes meant a house worth well over $2 million. "Today's incident will be analyzed as part of a comprehensive study on bias in law enforcement. The data will be presented to Congress next month." Sullivan was sitting in his patrol car now, head in his hands. The magnitude of his career destruction was becoming clear. Mills looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. Rodriguez was calculating how many ways this could destroy the department. But Terrence was checking his watch again. The encrypted message display showed, "Phase 2 authorized." Jensen caught his eye and nodded slightly. "However," Jensen continued, "this incident represents just the beginning of our investigation into Brookhaven Police Department." She paused for effect, letting the words sink in. "We'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all arrests, complaints, and interactions involving people of color over the past 5 years." Rodriguez felt his knees go weak. "Additionally, Agent Washington will be working directly with your department to implement bias training and oversight protocols." Sullivan looked up from his hands. "He's going to be working with us?" Jensen smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Agent Washington will be your new consulting supervisor for civil rights compliance. You'll be seeing quite a lot of each other." The irony was perfect. The man Sullivan had humiliated and arrested would now be overseeing his professional conduct. Mrs. Carter was still filming, tears of satisfaction streaming down her face. The comment section was exploding with celebration and outrage in equal measure. Chief Morrison finally reached the scene, took one look at the federal agents, the cameras, and Sullivan's defeated posture, and understood that his department's reputation had just been shattered on live television. But Jensen wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she announced to the crowd and cameras. "This entire operation was conducted with full departmental cooperation." Everyone stared at her. Brookhaven Police Department volunteered to participate in this study. Chief Morrison signed the agreement last month. The final twist hit like a bomb. Rodriguez stared at his chief in shock and betrayal. Morrison nodded grimly. The department agreed to federal oversight in exchange for avoiding a broader Justice Department investigation. Sullivan's world collapsed entirely. His own department had set him up. Terrence stepped forward, addressing the cameras directly. "Real-life stories like this happen every day across America. Black tales, stories that never get recorded, never get witnessed, never get justice." His voice carried the weight of 23 years in law enforcement and a lifetime of being judged by his skin color. But today, the system worked. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it worked. He looked directly at Sullivan. "Officer Sullivan, you have a choice now. You can learn from this, or you can repeat it, but you'll never do it without consequences again." Chief Morrison approached the Federal Command Center like a man walking to his own execution. His 28 years of service, his pension, his reputation, everything hung in the balance of the next conversation. Director Jensen didn't look up from her tablet as he approached. "Chief Morrison, thank you for your cooperation in Operation Mirror." "Director Jensen," Morrison's voice was carefully controlled. "I wasn't expecting such a comprehensive response. Agent Washington's detention triggered our emergency protocols." Jensen's fingers moved across the tablet screen. "Shall we review the data?" The mobile command unit had become an impromptu courtroom. Federal agents worked on laptops, processing real-time analysis. Mrs. Carter's live stream continued from across the street, 68,000 viewers now watching federal agents dismantle a police department's credibility in real time. The comment section was brutal. Brookhaven PD getting exposed. This is what justice looks like. Black Tail stories need to cover this daily. FBI coming for racist cops everywhere. Operation Mirror has been documenting bias patterns for 18 months, Jensen began. Brookhaven PD scored in the 97th percentile for racial disparities in arrests. Morrison's jaw tightened. Those statistics can be misleading. 97%. Jensen's voice cut through his protest. Meaning only 3% of departments nationwide show worse bias patterns than yours. She turned the tablet toward him. Charts and graphs filled the screen. Arrest rates by demographics, complaint ratios, use of force statistics. The data painted a devastating picture. Officer Sullivan represents a pattern, not an anomaly. Agent Washington documented 12 similar incidents across your department in the past 6 months. Rodriguez overhead, still reeling from the revelation that his own department had set them up. 12 incidents? Officer Mills, Jensen continued, consulting her files. 7 discrimination complaints in 18 months. Officer Torres, 9 complaints. Officer Kim, 4 complaints. Officer Patterson, 6 complaints. Officer Williams, 11 complaints. Each name hit Morrison like a physical blow. His officers weren't just making individual mistakes, they were creating a systematic pattern of institutional discrimination. Agent Sarah Carter, Jensen's legal counsel, stepped forward with additional documents. Chief Morrison, we've also documented disparities in traffic stops. Black motorists are 3.7 times more likely to be searched during routine stops. 3.7 times more likely, but contraband discovery rates are 42% lower, another agent added, indicating stops based on racial profiling rather than legitimate suspicion. Morrison felt the walls closing in. Every statistic was another nail in his department's coffin. Terrence stepped forward, his federal authority now undeniable. Chief Morrison, let's discuss the financial implications. Morrison's face went pale. Federal funding was everything. Equipment, training, technology, half their operating budget. Brookhaven PD receives $2.3 million annually in federal grants, Terrence continued, reading from his tablet. Civil rights violations can trigger immediate funding suspension under Section 14141 of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Section 14141, Rodriguez whispered to Mills. Mills had gone to law enforcement school. She knew the implications. Federal oversight. They can basically take over the entire department operation. Terrence pulled out his own tablet, numbers flowing across the screen with bureaucratic precision. Community policing grants, $412,000. Drug enforcement funding, $638,000. Equipment modernization, $815,000. Training programs, $327,000. Each number represented jobs, salaries, operations. Without federal money, Brookhaven PD would collapse within 3 months. Additionally, Jensen added, civil liability exposure from today's incident alone could reach 7 figures. Morrison found his voice. 7 figures? Federal civil rights lawsuits under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 start at $1 million, Agent Carter explained. Agent Washington's case would be prosecuted by the Justice Department Civil Rights Division directly. The crowd was growing exponentially. More news vans arrived every few minutes. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. This wasn't just local news anymore. The hashtag Brookhaven FBI was trending nationally across all social media platforms. Dana Williams was interviewing neighbors live on Channel 7. Carter had become an instant celebrity, her live stream being rebroadcast on major networks nationwide. But inside the command unit, the real corporate-style power play was just beginning. However, Jensen's tone shifted slightly, the first hint of negotiation. There is an alternative path forward. Morrison leaned forward desperately. Any alternative to federal takeover was worth considering. Consent decree. Voluntary compliance with federal oversight and reform protocols. What exactly would that involve? Terrence stepped forward again, consulting his comprehensive tablet. Complete restructuring of training protocols. Mandatory bias training for all officers, 40 hours annually, not the current 8 hours every 3 years. Each requirement felt like another nail in the department's independence. Body camera footage reviewed by federal monitors, Agent Carter added. Random sampling of 20% of all interactions, with particular focus on traffic stops and residential calls. External Oversight Board with community representation, Jensen continued. Monthly compliance reports to the Justice Department. Zero tolerance policy for verified discrimination complaints. Rodriguez was calculating rapidly in his head. Zero tolerance meant any substantiated complaint could end a career immediately. The old boys' club culture would die overnight. What specifically happens to Officer Sullivan? Morrison asked quietly. Jensen looked toward the patrol car where Sullivan sat. His career effectively ended. Officer Sullivan will serve as a case study. His actions today will be analyzed in federal training materials distributed to law enforcement agencies nationwide. The irony was perfect and brutal. Sullivan's racist assumptions would now educate thousands of officers about the consequences of bias. He can remain employed pending completion of 200 hours of bias training and community service, Terrence added, in black and brown neighborhoods specifically. Sullivan would spend the next year serving the very communities he'd discriminated against. The punishment fit the crime with poetic precision. The alternative to voluntary compliance, Jensen continued, is federal takeover under Title VI violations, complete loss of local control, federal management of all operations. Morrison had seen federal takeovers before in other cities. Those departments became shells of themselves, micromanaged by Washington bureaucrats who'd never walked a beat. Financial penalties would include full reimbursement of Operation Mirror costs, Terrence added, consulting his tablet again. Approximately $4.7 million over 18 months of investigation. Morrison's knees nearly buckled. $4.7 million would bankrupt the entire city government. Plus, Jensen added almost casually, criminal referrals for any officers found to have violated federal civil rights statutes under color of authority. Criminal referrals meant prison time. Sullivan could face federal charges for unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The live stream audience had reached 89,000 viewers. Comments flooded in from across the country. This is how you handle racist cops. FBI don't mess around with civil rights. Justice finally happening in real time. Black tale stories like this give me hope for America. Real-life stories showing change is possible. But anonymous accounts pushed back aggressively. Government overreach destroying good cops. What happened to due process? FBI targeting hard-working police. Morrison looked at his officers scattered around the scene. Rodriguez sweating profusely, Mills barely holding back tears, Sullivan broken and defeated in his patrol car. 28 years of building this department, and it was crumbling in real time on national television. If we accept the consent decree, Morrison asked slowly, what timeline are we looking at for implementation? Implementation begins immediately, Jensen replied without hesitation. Agent Washington will establish a permanent field office here within 30 days. Terrence smiled slightly, the first show of satisfaction he'd allowed himself. I'll be your new neighbor permanently, Chief, living right here in Brookhaven, overseeing daily compliance operations. The final twist of the knife. The man Sullivan had tried to remove from the neighborhood would now be running it with federal authority. Federal monitors will conduct quarterly reviews for 5 years minimum, Jensen continued. Extensions possible if compliance standards falter. 5 years of federal oversight, every arrest, every complaint, every interaction scrutinized by Washington bureaucrats. Morrison looked at the cameras, the crowd, the federal agents surrounding his command. His department's dirty laundry was being aired on national television. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was surrender or complete destruction. Chief, Rodriguez whispered urgently. We have to take the deal. We can't survive a federal takeover. Morrison nodded slowly, swallowing his pride. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. We accept the consent decree. Jensen smiled, the first genuine expression of satisfaction she'd shown all day. Excellent decision. Agent Washington will begin transition planning immediately. She gestured to one of her agents, who approached with legal documents already prepared. The FBI had known how this would end before it began. Sign here for voluntary compliance. Initial here for federal oversight acceptance. Date here. Each signature felt like surrendering a piece of his department's soul, but Morrison signed anyway. The alternative was complete destruction. The crowd applauded as word spread that the police department had accepted federal oversight. Mrs. Carter's comment section exploded with celebration. Justice served. This is what accountability looks like. Black stories finally getting the endings they deserve. But the real work was just beginning. Immediate accountability. Agent Carter stepped forward with additional paperwork. Officer Sullivan, you're suspended without pay pending completion of mandatory training. Sullivan looked up from his patrol car, defeat written across his face. For how long? 6 months minimum, Jensen replied. 200 hours of bias training, 100 hours of community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. The specificity was deliberate. Sullivan would spend his suspension working in the very communities he'd discriminated against. Officer Mills, formal reprimand, 40 hours of additional training within 90 days. Mills nodded mutely, grateful it wasn't worse. Sergeant Rodriguez, you'll be attending federal leadership training on bias recognition and intervention protocols. Rodriguez had failed to stop Sullivan's escalation. His silence made him complicit. Karen Mitchell tried to slip away unnoticed, but Jensen's voice stopped her cold. Ms. Mitchell, HOA coordinator, your statement that Agent Washington didn't belong in this neighborhood is now part of the federal record. Karen's face went white. I was mistaken. You were discriminatory. The HOA board will receive federal guidance on fair housing compliance. Even the neighborhood association wasn't immune from federal oversight. Systemic changes implementation. Terrence pulled out his tablet, reading from prepared reform protocols. Brookhaven PD will implement the Washington model for bias-free policing. The Washington model, named after him, would become the template for departments nationwide. All officers will complete 40-hour bias training annually, not the previous 8 hours every 3 years. Morrison winced. 40 hours meant taking officers off the street for a full work week every year. Body cameras will auto-upload to federal servers, random sampling of 20% of all interactions, with AI analysis for bias indicators. Technology would be their supervisor now. Every traffic stop, every arrest, every interaction monitored by federal algorithms. External Oversight Board established with 7 community representatives, monthly public meetings, quarterly compliance reviews. The community would have real power over police operations for the first time. Agent Carter added the financial details. Federal funding restored contingent on monthly compliance reports. First violation triggers immediate review. The carrot and stick approach. Comply or lose everything. Legal and financial ramifications. Civil liability insurance increased to $5 million annually, Jensen continued. Previous incidents under review for potential federal prosecution. Morrison's stomach dropped. $5 million in insurance would strain the city budget dramatically. Officer Sullivan faces potential federal charges under 18 U.S.C. 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Sullivan's hands shook. Federal civil rights charges carried up to 10 years in prison. However, cooperation with reform efforts may influence prosecutorial discretion. A lifeline. Comply completely, and maybe avoid federal prison. Community healing initiatives. Mrs. Carter approached the federal command unit, still live streaming. Agent Washington, what happens next for the community? Terrence smiled, the first genuinely warm expression he'd shown all day. "Mrs. Carter, you're now part of the oversight board. Your documentation made this accountability possible." The crowd cheered. Mrs. Carter had become a civil rights hero through her phone camera. Monthly town halls between police and residents, restorative justice programs for past incidents, community policing partnerships. Real change, not just punishment. Jensen addressed the growing crowd. Federal mediators will facilitate healing sessions between affected community members and officers. Personal victory and intellectual triumph. Terrence looked at his watch, the same omega that had marked the countdown to this moment. 11:47 a.m. Less than 2 hours had transformed everything. No violence, no lawsuits needed immediately, no revenge. Change achieved through documentation, federal leverage, and strategic patience. This model will be replicated in 46 other cities currently under federal investigation, Terrence announced for the cameras. Sullivan finally spoke from his patrol car. "Agent Washington, how long have you been planning this?" Terrence approached slowly. "Officer Sullivan, I've been documenting bias for 18 months, but you chose your actions today." The distinction was crucial. Terrence created the opportunity for justice. Sullivan created the injustice. "I could have responded with anger, with violence, with lawsuits. Instead, I responded with evidence." The crowd listened intently, phones still recording. Real change happens when we stay calm enough to be strategic. Broader impact. Dana Williams thrust her microphone forward. "Agent Washington, what message does this send nationally?" "Those touching stories of injustice don't have to end with despair," Terrence replied. "Life stories can have different endings when we document everything and use the system correctly." Mrs. Carter wiped tears from her eyes. Her simple decision to record had triggered a federal civil rights investigation. Jensen stepped forward for the final announcement. "The Brookhaven model will be presented to Congress next month as proposed legislation for nationwide police reform." Sullivan's racist assumptions had accidentally created the catalyst for national change. Morrison pocketed his copy of the consent decree, knowing his department would never be the same. But watching Terrence shake hands with community leaders, Morrison realized that transformation might not be such a terrible thing. The black tales that happened every day in America finally had an example of systematic justice. 6 months later, the Brookhaven Federal Field Office occupied the corner building on Maple Drive, just 3 blocks from where Officer Sullivan had handcuffed Agent Washington. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Terrence walked through his new neighborhood each morning, greeting the same neighbors who had witnessed his humiliation. Mrs. Carter always waved from her window, still proud of her role in changing everything. The numbers told the story of transformation. Racial profiling incidents in Brookhaven, down 78%. Officer complaints involving bias, down 84%. Community trust surveys, up 63%. Officer Sullivan had completed his bias training and community service. The man who once saw threats in black faces now coached youth basketball in East Brookhaven. His transformation wasn't complete, but it was real. "Agent Washington changed my life," Sullivan admitted during his first public interview. "I was raised with hate, but I don't have to live with it." Personal transformation and legacy. Terrence's promotion to assistant director of the newly created National Bias Prevention Unit came with a mandate: replicate Brookhaven nationwide. His marriage to Dr. Keisha Washington, a community activist and researcher, strengthened his resolve. Together, they represented the intellectual approach to social change: data over drama, strategy over street protests. The Washington Protocol was now studied in police academies across 43 states. His book, Staying Calm in the Storm, an FBI agent's guide to systemic change, became required reading for law enforcement leadership. Broader social impact. Mrs. Carter's live stream had sparked a movement. #OurDocument. Everything became a rallying cry for civil rights advocates. Her video, now with 12 million views, proved that ordinary citizens with smartphones could trigger federal investigations. The Brookhaven model had been implemented in 27 cities. Crime rates remained stable while bias complaints plummeted. The data proved that fair policing was also effective policing. Karen Mitchell had resigned from the HOA board and moved to Florida. The new community leadership reflected Brookhaven's actual diversity for the first time. National Legislative Impact Congress had passed the Federal Police Accountability Act, directly inspired by Operation Mirror. The legislation required bias training, federal oversight triggers, and community representation in police governance. Senator Maria Rodriguez cited Terrence's testimony. Agent Washington proved that we can achieve justice through documentation and determination, not destruction and division. The power of preparation over confrontation. Standing in his federal office, Terrence reflected on that morning 6 months ago. His calm response to Sullivan's racism had triggered the largest police reform movement in decades. The core lesson resonated in every speech he gave. True power comes from preparation, not confrontation. Systemic change requires documentation, allies, and strategic patience. He'd maintained his dignity while achieving collective progress, exactly what his father had taught him. Personal growth and continued mission. The young black agents who now worked under Terrence saw him as proof that the system could work for justice, not just power. His quiet leadership style inspired a new generation of federal investigators focused on civil rights. Every case they solved added to the growing collection of real-life stories that proved change was possible. Call to action. Your story matters, Terrence said, looking directly into the camera during his final interview. Every injustice you witness, every bias you document, every moment you choose courage over comfort, it all adds up. He paused, thinking of Mrs. Carter and her phone, of the neighbors who spoke up, of the federal agents who responded. Share your experiences with bias in the comments below. Your Black Tales stories could be the evidence someone needs for justice. Subscribe to Black Tales Stories for more accounts of quiet courage and systemic change. Because touching stories don't have to end with tears. They can end with transformation. Visit our website for resources on Know Your Rights training and bias reporting. Together, we can document our way to equality. And remember, when you see injustice, don't just get angry. Get evidence. The screen faded to black with one final message. Black Tales Stories, where real-life stories create real change.